Hi everyone, my name is Pippa and I'm going to give you a braiding tutorial today. I'm going to start by showing you the different tools I use. So here's my braiding pouch with different sections. You can find special braiding pouches at tack shops. You don't need it, you can use your pockets. I also have my yarn I'm going to use today. It's about 2 lengths of my forearm. I tend to wrap it around and then cut it. I also have my 2 clips. Can never have too many clips on hand. They'll hold the mane back as you braid. And then going through the rest of my tools, I've got my rug hook or pull through. You can use any shape or size. Also got some scissors. You need some small sharp ones. I have a pulling comb for when that's necessary, and my spray bottle to wet the mane as I go. And then we've also got a seam ripper to take the braids out at the end. So here's a closer look at all the tools. You can get different shapes and sizes at different tack shops or craft stores. Usually when I braid, I'll start right behind the ears and work my way down to the withers, but for the purposes of this video, we are going to take a section in the middle of Rocky's mane. I use my clip to section the hair. It really depends on the thickness of your horse's mane, whether you take more hair or less hair. If you have a thick mane, you might want a smaller section to work with. A thin mane, you may need a little more hair to make your braid the right size. Now it's time to prep the mane to start braiding. I use water, that's what's in my spray bottle that you can see. I spray directly onto the hair. Rocky does not mind the sounds and sensation of the spray bottle, but if your horse does mind, you can use a small sponge to wet the mane. You could also use hairspray or a quick braid here. Quick braids can be purchased at your tack shop. It makes the mane a little bit tackier so that as you're braiding, it holds itself. To start your braids, it's a regular 3-strand braid. You want to make sure that these are 3 even strands. Consistency is key, as you will learn throughout this video. I separate the 3 strands with my fingers, but if you have a hard time doing this, you can definitely buy a 3-prong tool at your local tack shop. This helps until you have a good idea of how much hair you need. Now, as I start my braid, I do count how many times I cross over. This is another area where consistency will be crucial as you make sure that your braids are consistent sizes and lengths throughout the mane. So once I've crossed over 11 times, that's when I go to add in my yarn. In this case, we are going to use white yarn so that you can see the contrast with Rocky's hair. If I was braiding him for a show, it would be black yarn so that it blends right in. I split the yarn directly down the middle so that it's even throughout and add it into the front of the braid. Some braiders prefer to add it in the back. I like it in the front so I can see what I'm working with. I then cross over 9 more times. This is another number that I keep consistent throughout. If you're working with a thinner or thicker hair, your number might change. As long as it's consistent, you won't have any problems with size. Once I have finished all of my crossovers, I pull the yarn to the side, make sure that all the hair is separate from the yarn, and wrap it around to tie a nice tight knot. If you prefer to add a second knot here, you can definitely do so. I find 1 knot does the trick, and pull it nice and tight. If I was braiding Rocky for a show, I would also be trimming this excess hair. His hair is thin, so it doesn't need to be pulled, but it is a little bit long. For today, we are going to leave the hair so that we don't have one section that's just a little bit shorter. To bump the braid, we use what we call a rug hook or a pull through. I insert this at the base of the neck and it slides right down. As it slides through, the clasp tends to open. This is useful because we will now be putting the yarn into the hook. Making sure that we close the latch, otherwise the latch sometimes can get caught in the base of the braid, and that's a tangled mess that we don't want to have to worry about. Now we want to make sure that the braid is tight up against Rocky's neck. As you can see, I am pulling it nice and tight. The knot is right at the base. Now, you don't want to pull it too far through. I'm going to demonstrate how that would look. In this case, we don't have enough of the braid left to work with. It's too tight for us to bump. You also then don't want your braid to be hanging out too low. Your braid would be too loose and at risk of falling out. So right up against the neck is where you want it to be with that little bit of tension. So because it's winter, Rocky has a little extra fluffy hair. I'm just pushing it out of the way of our braid. By starting the bumping, we do our first knot below the base of the braid. This knot is what determines the size of our bump. If you need a little bit more braid to work with, you can undo the knot and give yourself some more hair. The second knot, I do a double loop around the yarn. This makes sure that the knot does not undo itself as I move on in the process and holds the braid steady. This knot requires the most fiddling. If you have shape issues, this is where you can push it, you can straighten it out, but once this knot's done, there's no going back. The last place I will add knots is below the base of the braid again. I will also do a double loop knot under there, holds it nice and tight. And I'm adding my final knot just to hold everything together tight. When you're done bumping, you're ready to cut off that excess yarn. I pull it out to the side because the knot's in the back and cut that excess yarn. You want to get nice and close so you don't see the ends of the yarn, but not too close that you're cutting the knot. Now, if the yarn matched Rocky's hair, you would not see those white snippets. That hair that I'm pulling would also not be there. You would see the braid. I'm going to do a second braid for you so that you can have another look at how it's done. As you can see, I've sectioned my hair with my comb. I am wetting it, and I will do my braiding down my 11 crossovers. Adding in the yarn, again putting it at the front. This is another way you can do it by placing one backwards and then crossing it down in. Adding my 9 crossovers before I pull it into a knot. Separating the yarn from the hair, wrapping around to knot it. Using the rug hook directly in the middle at the back to take that yarn and pull it through. Again, pulling it tight, not too tight, also not hanging out loose. Something to keep in mind is the comfort of the horse. If your braids are pulling through and pulling their hair, they're more likely to rub it. My double knot through the middle there, holding the bump straight. I can compare to my other braid and see the size below and above that knot, making sure that I'm staying consistent. As you can see here, I am cutting the yarn nice and close and pulling those hairs out of the way. You can see the consistency across the bottom. That's what you want down the whole neck. I'm now going to show you how to take out the braid with a pick. Scissors can also be used, but the pick is easier to precisely find the yarn. Also, you're less at risk of cutting the hair out. You want to use the pick to take out the knots. As you can see there, I undid the bumping knots and now I'm undoing that last braid knot. Taking out braids can be a fairly long process, but once you get into a routine, it does speed up. I'm going to take out the other braid too. You'll see the same technique of picking at the knot. Being very careful I'm not cutting out Rocky's hair. It would be so unfortunate if I took out a chunk. The next time that he gets braided, he would then have one braid that's uneven or just one braid that can't even be added. So I'm being very careful of his hair as I take out these braids. I'm now going to show you how to braid a forelock. Rocky has a very thin forelock, so the braid will be fairly small. It's actually easier to braid a forelock that has lots of hair. The braid is easier to hold onto and to see. A forelock braid is a French braid, so it could be useful to practice on yourself or someone else before going to a horse. But just as any French braid, you start with your 3 strands at the top. As you go, you pull small sections from the sides of the forelock. It's important here that your sections are consistent. Both sides should be evenly taken from as you work your way down. So because Rocky's quite fluffy, it's a little hard to see between his forelock and the fluff between his ears. But I'm taking small sections from either side, adding them into the French braid, keeping it smooth as I go. Once all of the forelock is captured into the French braid, you continue braiding down a little bit further. I usually braid half of what's left before I add in my yarn. Again, I'm going to use white yarn here so that you can see the color contrast between the yarn and Rocky's mane. Just as we did in the mane, I will be braiding a few more times to get that yarn right into the hair before I wrap around in a knot. There is no set length that you need to braid down here as long as you get all the hair. We then use our rug hook again to bump the forelock. The forelock bump is slightly different from the main, and I will show you here. You still want it directly down the middle of the braid. The forelock can be a little trickier because it is longer. Can take a few tries to get that directly down the center, but once you've got the hook out the end, we're putting the yarn on it and closing the latch before we pull it through. When you pull the hair through, you want to make sure that the little tail there does get tucked up. You don't want to end up trimming that hair off. You do want it tucked in. To then tie the knot down and hold it flat, I cross one piece of yarn either side. So I slide my rug hook through, as you can see, and I place the yarn into that rug hook and pull it across. I'll repeat the same thing on the other side. To finish your forelock braid, you simply tie a nice double knot on the top. Again, if this yarn was the same color as Rocky's mane, you would not see this knot stand out. And then cutting it nice and close, just as we did on the mane. I will now show you how to take out the forelock. Very similar to your main braids, you want to cut those knots, being careful of cutting his hair. So you'll see here that I take the pick directly at the knot, cut that white, and then everything comes undone nice and easily. In the next clip, you'll see a list of tools that I recommend. Feel free to track me down if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.